I remember when that gun was pointing at me and that person was pulling that trigger, that I just closed my eyes because I couldn't run. I was frozen in time. And I just knew that was it. My name is Sheldon Jacobs, and I live with post-traumatic stress disorder. So my mental health journey is a complex one. When I was around 10 years of age, my family moved me from the inner city of San Diego, California, to the suburbs. And it was a cultural shock for me. And I went from being around black and brown people to being around nothing but white people. And I experienced a lot of racism as a result. And also around the same time, I was also diagnosed with a learning disability. I also had a stuttering problem. As a result of those differences, my peers would also ridicule me and call me names and call me stupid. So it got to a point where I started hating myself. I started hating who I was. And I started socializing with negative peers, peers that were, some of which were involved in gangs. And that's kind of how I started receiving and feeling supported, because they took me in and did not look at my shortcomings as a problem or an issue. And so then I started making very poor decisions. I was getting in fights all the time. I was getting suspended from school. And as a result of my bad decisions, I started putting myself in grave danger. 3 incidents happened to me in a 1-week span, which changed my life forever. So the first incident was a close friend of mine was killed in a drive-by shooting, a friend of mine who was 14 years of age. Then a second incident occurred where I was almost accosted by rival gang members. I was surrounded on my way to school, and a couple of them put out knives, and I was able to get away from those individuals, and nothing happened, but they had very bad intentions. And then a few days after that incident, I was back in my old neighborhood where my grandparents still resided, and I was walking home from this park, and this car pulls up beside me, and all I see is a gun pointed at me. And I see that person pull that trigger. And for whatever reason, that gun never went off. And I can remember, though, in that very moment, I thought that all the negative and poor decisions I made at that point had caught up to me, and that I was finally meeting my fate. And the only thing I could think of, it was my mother standing over my casket at my funeral. And so I remember when that gun was pointing at me and that person was pulling that trigger, that I just closed my eyes because I couldn't run. I was frozen in time. And I just knew that was it. And so it was at that point where I realized that, you know what, I have another chance at life because that gun didn't go off. And I was able to get home safely. But as a result of that trauma, I started having these symptoms for years. And at the time, I didn't know what was the cause of it, because I didn't know anything about post-traumatic stress. I just thought I was having just these bad nightmares and these terrible flashbacks from the trauma. And one of the reasons why I got help was because I was in grad school. And as a part of my graduate program, I was required to, all the students were required to receive mental health counseling. So that we could learn about what counseling looks like, because we were going to be counselors ourselves. And so I recall sitting down with this therapist and talking a little bit about that experience. And that's when he told me, you know what, you have post-traumatic stress. And that was the first time I ever heard that term. I have a cousin who we're like brothers. I'm a year older than him. We pretty much grew up with each other. And during my sophomore year of college, his first year of college, he ended up having a psychotic break. He was in and out of psychiatric hospitals for a good 5 or 6 years. Multiple suicide attempts. Try to harm his father as well. It was just a six-year period of hell for my cousin and for our family. During one of his hospitalizations, a nurse had mentioned NAMI, and so his mom got the information, and they decided to look into it and attend a couple groups. And from that point on, his life was was on this path towards recovery, where he was in these peer groups, peer-to-peer support groups, where other individuals that had similar struggles as he did, and as well as my family, they were able to go to these family support groups, learn more about my cousin's condition, and find other ways to kind of help support him. And that was everything. I say it to this day that NAMI saved my cousin's life, and my family feels the same way. And so I've always felt indebted to NAMI as a result of the support that my family needed during such a challenging time for my family. Something that I see that's so prevalent within the Black community, especially amongst Black men, that we have this real issue when it comes to seeking help and talking about what it is that's going on with ourselves. And it's something that it has to change, because we are hurting. We are experiencing all kinds of levels of trauma, from racism, from violence, from poverty. And so I'm trying to change the narrative, as it pertains to mental health and stigma, and finding that courage to talk about mental health. So one of the things that I'm hopeful for is, just as a Black male therapist myself, sharing my story, sharing my lived experience, because I was on that trajectory. So when I found that voice that came after I started my own recovery journey, it was kind of like that aha moment for me. It was kind of like, you know what? I want every Black male to experience what I experienced, in terms of getting the help that not only I needed, or that they need, but that they deserve. One of the things I've been seeing over the last few years is this tide, this change in the tide, in terms of more Black men seeking help, more Black men coming to support groups, reaching out about needing therapy, and that's huge on so many levels. And one of the biggest things is NAMI tailoring our approach to meet our various communities where they need to be met. So creating these very robust, but yet creative programming and programs and support groups that are geared towards Black men in particular, or other specialized populations. And it goes back to what NAMI has done to be inclusive and to meet these communities that maybe haven't been represented in the past, but we understand the importance of representing them now. NAMI means my life. It saved my cousin's life. In many ways, it's also helped to enhance my life. So NAMI is my life.